for Senate appropriations, and we're continuing our work on the 2025 budget. And so now we're taking testimony from the Agency of Education. Obviously, there's been a lot of education-related and funding discussions that have occurred over the last few weeks. But we're going to focus on your FY25 budget since you're presenting it. And I know that you have a lot of information here, more than we're going to get through.
Sure.
But it'll give us an opportunity to kind of walk through any highlights in the budget, but also what you sort of the work ahead, what you see as some of the challenges as it relates to the work that you have also. And it's an opportunity. Although obviously we've been seeing a lot of some of your staff. It's a nice way to end the day. And so, this is obviously just one piece of a much larger discussion. Appreciate your being here, and I'm gonna let you take it and sort of go through. We are not, we can't approach our budget the way the House would do it, line by line or whatever. We don't want to do that. We want to really focus on what are the something that might be substantially change, some initiative. What you see really as, I think probably your secretary's message will reflect on that in terms of what our public education system is and the challenges that we are confronting as we are trying to do the best by our students. So I'm going to let you take it. What's it? And are you still interim? Oh. That's too hard to say. So Secretary Boucher, I'm going to have you start with sort of the framework and then you turn it over to staff, however you want to.
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's really nice to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. For the record, Heather Boucher, Interim Secretary of Education. Madam Chair, you just threw me a bit of a curveball because I was going to blast through my slides because I thought for sure this is not what they would like to hear about. For sure, they would love to hear about the nuts and bolts of our budget. But on the fly, what I would say is that just as a reminder, the mission of the agency is to provide support, provide leadership, provide oversight, and those three pillars really do still guide all of our work. As much as we hold the field accountable in terms of monitoring and oversight, we try to provide support, try to provide leadership. Given the context we're in, that's really needed more now than ever. And we can talk a little bit more about that. Sean, would you mind going to just the next slide that has sort of the high level bullets? So in terms of our division, this is just a quick schematic of that. I don't think I'll spend too much time on that, but if folks have questions about what the structure of the agency is, I'm happy to go through that.
Well, one thing is that this committee has been a committee for quite a while, so yeah, like the House committee's got a lot of new members, but
yeah,
fortunately, we're pretty experienced here. So
next, Sean, thank you. Okay, that one is kind of funny, if I might go back. So I said, no, don't put a picture of me in this PowerPoint, because they had a big picture of my face and I was like, absolutely not. And so they snuck in this.
That's a great picture.
It was actually at the Teacher of the Year celebration at Champlain Elementary last year. So it was a lot of fun. And it was a graffiti wall, but like an appropriate graffiti wall. But we were saying the things that we were grateful for, and it was wonderful.
almost like art on the sideboard.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, next. Okay, so obviously the biggest thing that we've all been thinking about is the growth in education spending. As you know, we've been working closely with members of the legislature to try and figure out perhaps, how we can, and obviously there has been legislation already to try and turn the curve in terms of 850. Nicole has tons of information that she can share if folks are interested in an update on sort of where we are with funding. I'm not gonna go through the reading for that spending growth, which is what is in the budget book, because it was written a few months now ago, and so it was important to clarify that. But I will point out that a big issue still going on, is student mental health and well-being, and that is a big reason why we do have an increase, in our ed spending. And so I think we still have not yet cracked the code, with Senator Lyons on how to best serve, our students, or families with respect to mental health and related services. So we have some work to do still on that. But
I'm glad you're doing it. Though.
yeah, some structural work. It comes naturally to me, just given my background, and I think it's really critical. I don't think it's I think it would be naive for anyone to think that we're gonna go back to a model where truly education is just about math and science.
It never has been. My neighbor talked during the Depression, and she talked about students who came in who had been physically abused, who hadn't eaten all weekend. As long as you've got kids, they're gonna bring the realities of their life with them, and it doesn't matter whether it's school or wherever it is. But often school is sometimes the safe haven. But the other thing, we're looking at, mental health and well-being, and a lot of times what improves mental health and well-being is a clinical intervention and therapy in that regard. It's how to get success in a positive environment. Looks at teachers on the news bringing in dogs and kids talking to the reading. And so some of it is how to make those connections and how to engage kids in a way that, and I'll take a minute, but I was at a Upward Bound, but I went to a community high school at Vermont graduation. And 5 guys, they were in a Newport facility, and they were getting their high school diploma. And they all got up and spoke, and they spoke as well as any kid coming through the traditional high school. And one kid said, I realize this is not the avenue desired to get my high school diploma, but for me, this is such an accomplishment after being told my entire life I'm a failure. And as long as someone is feeling that way, it's going to impact. And so how to make those connections and so forth. But it was a haunting statement after all these years of being told I'm a failure. And so I understand the need for that, but it also means thinking about the environment and the way in which we relate, how we teach differently. So I think it's a tremendous challenge. And I just don't think it's sending somebody to for a mental health appointment, to be honest. It's much broader than that, but it certainly is something that teachers are encountering every day. So
I'm happy to see that there's a piece of mental health, but here's what I'm seeing in my local budgets. And in my local budgets before COVID, most of the contracts were with my mental health agency. Now I'm watching, and I have a unified elementary school district in one of the supervisory unions that I represent. It's got 4 elementary schools. They have 4 mental health professionals that they're basically have hired, and they used ESSER monies to do it, and now it's moved out, and there's a whole segment in the budget that we're making up for them. Those were good contracts with my mental health agency. And my mental health agency, like almost every mental health agency across the state, is now in trouble. And I, for one, look at those families and say, a lot of times it's not only the kid, it's the parents that's having trouble. And now I have a mental health agency that is in trouble. And we've got services in the school for the kid, but I have a mental health agency, and I don't see what they're offering as holistic, the way they're dealing with the family. And, I'm seeing a splintering of service. It's concerning.
Mhm.
And I, on an appropriations committee like this with limited dollars, I can't make everybody better. And so I'm worried about the way we're headed in the services we're offered and where it's being offered. And I don't question the fact that we need mental health services in schools.
So I guess that gets back to this success beyond six, the relationship we have with that professional provider community, or the extent to which we use privately practicing clinicians, and leverage Medicaid dollars as opposed to, we've got to have our own staff, but that's a much larger discussion, and I think one that we are gonna do today, so.
I love what you're talking about though, because I'm also very worried and, we are in a parallel system that's not a sustainable answer.
No.
For a variety of reasons. In some districts, when that happens, because there aren't the services or the supports really for the clinicians in the school, they actually go back to the DA. Because they're like, I'm getting no clinical supervision, like this is not what I want, but, and you don't want to talk more about.
No, and
Yeah,
no, so, yes,
Yeah, briefly, it will be, I'd like to have you come in with others into health and welfare. I don't know how to get education there, but well, I have 3 members of education on my committee. But to look at the ESSER funding that we did have for the state, and then I know there's some really good programs right now, with, in Middlebury, for example, with CSAC, and they're doing good stuff. So, and so it'd be good to talk about.
yeah, and so that's part of looking at what's been out there, what innovation, what seems to be working, what can be transferred. And that's, but that's part of our dynamic world is constantly changing practice. I said, we don't bleed people before we give them the appendectomy anymore, but a lot of our systems, we just add on and never go back and look at maybe some alterations in fundamental practices, but we're gonna, just one other comment,
One more comment.
and then we're going back to the budget.
Also, what I've seen is my larger schools can afford services and they have, a group of kids that's all, and my smaller schools can't.
Huge inequity right there. Yeah, and most schools, will feel compelled, and are compelled federally, for instance, around, IDEA legislation to student these services. If the staffing isn't available in the community through designated agencies, which isn't really their fault necessarily, we have like a workforce shortage problem across many sectors in our state.
Well, it's gonna get
Schools
worse
will
if
feel
we
compelled.
flatline their budgets, which is what the governor's budget proposed, no increase.
Well,
So-
and you take some of their best contracts that were with schools, and you take that away, you're splintering the service and the aids offered, it makes it harder for the mental health.
Well,
I can't speak for
Sorry.
funding or anything like that, but I can speak about the intersection of them and what a good model is.
Yeah.
I'm happy to come back in. That's okay.
well,
Can we go next?
we need to get back to the money,
So our key policy
but everything
initiatives,
comes down to money, don't you?
yeah, our key policy initiatives this year, are about CTE finance reform, literacy, remote learning, and then, clearly education spending and cost control. And we've made some good progress in Senate education on CTE reforms. I'm a little sad to say that the finance reforms hit a bit of a hurdle at the very end. And hopefully we'll get to have more conversation about that.
That's been,
The bill did meet crossover, so we're hoping to continue talking about that. I think what we had put forth was perhaps a different session. It wouldn't have been seen as scary, just given what else is going on, but really from our perspective, it's not, there's no increase or decrease to the education funding. It's really it was really a pilot getting the funds directly to the CTEs, which we've all been wanting to do for a very long time. But I'm just, you'll see that when it comes through, and I'm not Faltang Senate Education, we worked very well with them, on that and literacy.
I think we
We go
do
to
have a
the
literacy
package.
bill.
Yep, let's come out. Remote learning, for that one, we are, really just trying to shore up some needed language in our flexible pathways section of law, because right now it's kind of the Wild West in terms of which students get access to online learning and which don't. Because it really, we at the agency need a little tighter language to be able to advise districts on like what you can do. And part of that is the ADM, so you probably will want to take a look at this. And so what our proposal is to treat students who are in online learning as they get, if there's an ADM there that they can use as well. It's the same as the other flexible pathways, in other words. So, and then we can spend a lot of time shopping.
Well, we won't hear because we're obviously well, it's not that, no,
This is really about our operation.
yeah, not that, because there are other forums where that work is being, done.
Okay,
Sean is carpool.
So maybe Sean, we just kind of like run through these if you'd like to, or would you, yeah, why don't we just do that and just not get in the details, and then if folks have questions.
Okay.
Just do like high rate costs, does that make sense?
Well, we know the biggest, of course, is just the money spent, for the, education.
Yeah, Sean Fussell from Agency Med. And yeah, our budget this year is 2.697 billion. That's an increase of 143 million. That's made up of some increases offset by some decreases in federal spending due to expiration of pandemic funding. Give us $2 million increase in personal services and operating. And that's kind of broken out.
Why did a $2 billion increase in
Yeah,
personal services, if you could give us a little better?
You wanna go back to the other slide or?
Yeah.
No, it's up here.
it's broken out on this slide, some of the drivers. So we, of course, the state had a 15% increase in healthcare costs. We have a couple of taxes, FMLI, and childcare taxes, I'm probably familiar with those.
So your overall increase is 3.8%,
For the,
15% increase in healthcare costs.
Right.
Is that, so how did you do that and the schools couldn't do it?
Yeah,
Why could you do it and the schools couldn't?
well,
because you have the
That's a
governor.
really good question.
There's
We start with
no-
actually, how do we do budgeting? So we actually start from a very different place, which is,
Well, I mean,
no,
you're
seriously, I mean-
you're the agency. It would just seem to me the common sense that you could give them advice, maybe they take it or they don't. But if you can do a 3.8% increase with a 15% increase in healthcare costs, which is similar to what the schools are complaining about, why do they need a 20% increase in their funding?
Oh,
That's the question, and I realize it's loaded, but you're the agency of education.
Yeah.
So this is where my problem is.
it's a different governance structure, as you know.
yes, and I really wasn't kidding when I just said the fundamentals of how the budgets are built is different. So my understanding is at the local level, you start with what did we get last year, and then we're building onto that. And that's not how we in the state build our budget. For personnel costs, probably, because those are fixed, but for the rest, we look at each of them and say, what does this cost to actually do? So I think that's a fundamental difference.
I think one of the things though that people say, well, our personnel costs are fixed. But that's really where all your cost center are.
Yeah.
And so getting back to Senator Sears' comment, if you say all our workforce is fixed and we can't change it, and we now have a staffing ratio of 4 to 1 in our schools, then you have to look at what do you have? Where are those positions? How are they being used? How do we do things more efficiently? And maybe the way in which a lot of our, because I was at town meeting and this whole thing, and it's sort of like, well, we start with that and we add on, and somebody got up and said, well, don't you look at what you perhaps could shed? And then the argument is, well, why we needed everything that was there. So it is a very different budgetary
Well, I
environment.
understand that, but we're the ones. Governor's blaming us. I read it in the paper, what papers there are left in the state. And the people that are writing me about S18 are blaming us for considering a 20% increase according to the S18 letters.
Mhm.
That's the smokeless tobacco that somebody introduced. And
Being voted on this
they voted on
afternoon.
this afternoon. So that, they had said, it's the legislature, so here we are sitting here. Being blamed for a 20% increase, and you guys are the education. Well, you should go to send out a memo saying, hey, you ever think about doing it differently?
Yeah.
What we did,
Did you send out a memo?
we didn't send a memo quite like that, but what we did do repeatedly is say, do not hold all of your ESSER dollars, the tranche of all those federal dollars into your state budget. And I'm not sure that they listened.
They did not mention.
I'm not even sure they thought through, which we had said to them many times. We cannot, it will break our state, like, we cannot absorb the 200, I mean, it was like $240 million of federal dollars.
And build it into your base.
Yes, and
Sure.
some did. I do know, for instance, Colchester did. And interestingly, they had no trouble passing their budget.
And then we saw some other budgets that basically called ESSER part of their base, so it artificially depressed the level of general education fund increase demand. So there was a lot of, in spite of your instructions, they obviously decided that all of that was necessary, and those positions in some cases got folded in. St. Johnsbury was the case, but their budget went down, but that was a 25% increase. I don't know what it looked like in your.
Well, the banking people didn't get the message.
Well, they got it, they
They
just didn't
voted for
read
the
it or
budget.
hear
So, that's part of the challenge. in
Then
terms
they'll
of-
complain when November when property tax can do it, right around election time, that'll be. Yeah, well, yeah, he's chair of education, so.
Well, if we
it.
could,
Right on the bills.
if we can somehow figure out a more understandable finance system, but right now, we've got a system that in fact
Well,
has rather perverse impacts. I remember going to a school board meeting and they're saying, why should we reduce 500,000? It's just taking it away from our students and it won't change our property tax rate. So people are smart in it, but what it does obviously is it keeps that level of spending. And so this is something, and you were around with Act 60, right?
thank you for that reminder.
Okay. And so now we're struggling
But
with how to
we're
connect those
discussing-
funding decisions with the fact that you're gonna have to pay. And now we're getting, well, there must be some other magical revenue source to continue the level of funding that we're desiring. And why don't we go to the income tax? Well, if you can look at what income tax supports, all of state government and what the state government budgets look like.
We're
It's-
already on the income tax for 2/3.
Yeah,
Yeah, and we are already,
Yeah.
so it's, you created this, Senator.
I know, but I was gonna
Thanks a
defend
lot,
myself.
seniors.
Huh?
I was gonna defend the decisions that were made back then, some of which should have been further moved, but we didn't. But one of the decisions was to continue to use the property tax because it was stable.
Mhm.
The income tax is not stable. You look at over the years where you have a dwindling income tax where the general fund has to eat the losses, in bad times and good times, it looks better. So and then we added the sales tax, and the lottery was kind of a no-brainer because everybody said the lottery went to education, there was advertising, but then everybody would stand up and tell me and say, you didn't send every dime to the lottery. But they could have done a statewide teachers contract. That was the issue during the Act 60 debate, one of the issues.
Or at least read.
And they chose not to. And I think if you look back on that history, maybe that wasn't such a good decision.
Well, there are a lot of what ifs in this.
I understand.
Property tax is no longer stable, no longer
It's no
stable.
longer stable, but.
Well, you can, it's like any tax, you
Back-
reach an upper point,
Yeah.
When
once,
Senator Kitchell mentioned that I was here during the Act 60, she's trying to age me, number one. Number two, she's trying to make sure that it's clear. And I had to defend myself from those charges.
Number three, she's trying to save Senator Campion.
And I'm trying to save Senator Campion from being thrown under the bus over all this.
I guess all I'm saying is, no one envisioned where we are today.
No.
And so that's part of what we're
Oh,
trying to.
thank you. I didn't realize that's, oh, that's generous.
Well, I don't think, just like when we did the 5% cap, how that evolved, what we thought made sense was really to provide a financial, a slope for those small number of communities that were gonna get really adversely impacted by the weighting. And so then everybody said, that's free money. That's free money because I can spend, and there's no such thing as free money. But, so the locals are doing what we do to the feds. Really, I mean, trying to figure out how you can leverage, how you can squeeze something in, how you can whatever. But, so that's gonna be our challenges.
I'm really sorry for asking questions.
You
Sorry I asked.
I think, from my perspective as well, the tax component is super important and the fiscal pieces obviously, but I have great respect for Act 60 and I think it was done and it was amazingly intended. It was really from the heart, an incredible way to actually address huge inequities. But it hasn't worked because we still have inequities. So the students that we wanted to make sure got the most resources because they needed that. It hasn't happened because you still have to rely on the local community to pass that budget. And we know that that doesn't happen. And so as I reflect on this, I think, every other state, I believe, doesn't, basically the state says, here's what you're getting. And, the rest is up to you. Now that is.
To manage to the.
Right,
Available
to get more than that. I mean, you obviously have to get that amount right
Yeah.
that you agree on to actually get to the LEAs, but that's, we know that will be inequitable. That's what we were trying to
But
move
the
away
problem
from
of the
for Act 60.
Supreme Court decision was it didn't provide for adequate education or whatever. It was equal education opportunity. So if one school has this, the other school has to have an equal opportunity. That was the argument. So you couldn't say, well, here's the base. We'll give you $10,000 per student, and if you want to go above that, you can spend 15. Well, that would create more inequity. And so that the Supreme Court decision really forced us to where we were.
Yeah.
But I always thought that, school funding formulas lasted about 15 to 20 years around in the state. And that there would be significant changes in the school funding formula that, we went from the Miller formula to some other formula.
Morse Giuliani.
The Morse Giuliani.
Yeah.
And then, you would have thought that sometime between now and that was the year of the Act 60.
1988, right?
1990 something.
Yeah.
Anyway, you would have thought by now there would be a significant shift.
Well, I think maybe we're at that point.
The problem is that the Supreme Court decision, unless somebody can challenge that decision.
Well, you could do it on weighted pupils, like you could do a block grant that's based on weighted pupils, that might be a way.
You could.
I'm gonna bring the discussion back to the budget because that is exactly the kind of work that's going on. And House Ways and Means and a small working group across is examining various ways, recognizing you have to do it in a way that's compliant with Brigham. But there are multiple options of how to comply. So you're absolutely right, and we're at a point, and I think Senator Baruth made that when we passed H 850, that that was just the beginning step. It was not the answer. I think what we're experiencing around here is how we're getting pummeled for the high spending and the high burden that property taxes. Poor Senator Cummings looks like she's put through the ringer. She is so worried about people in the city of Montpelier being taxed out of their home. And I'm like, but your school board should be just as concerned about bringing in a budget that has that potential. And there's this psychology about somehow the state will make it, but the state is us. And right now, we've been hit because how can you ban this and reduce revenues when you're gonna hit us with a 20% property tax rate? So we're getting hit with a whole bunch of, and the governor, you know, has certainly used his opportunity. So we're just been really put through the grinder, so to speak, in terms of this budgetary environment, and somehow there's gonna be some magical way, and there is no magical way. So it's gonna force some very difficult, and it's not, I had one person that was sort of like, well, you're always negative and it feels like you're picking on us. And I'm like, no, that's not really the motivation here. It's really, what is the system doing? How is it organized? What are the options here? How can we get fiscal rigor and so forth? But we are not in a comfortable place, I guess is what you're hearing. And that's much larger than what you're responsible for your staff and your budget, but you're here and you're getting the benefit of our frustration.
Perfectly fine, that's my job, so that's okay, and I appreciate.
So we want you to share the pain.
Yeah.
You see.
We just testified in-house education on some research on class size and ratio.
It used to be 15-to-1
ratios.
was the ideal class size. We were told by a former secretary.
It depends. Yes, we are, in some communities, we are so much lower than that. But yeah, that's reasonable even for small kids.
4 or 5,
And then it gets even worse if you talk about staff to student
Right.
ratio. So I'm only saying that because we are also, feel free to bring us in if you'd like to have conversations about potential changes beyond the fiscal components. There are a couple of new requests and then some changes I did want to highlight.
And these are in the governor's budget.
Yes.
Okay.
So the FTE, the new FTE for career tech ed,
I thought we had added a position a number of years ago.
we did a number of years ago, this would be to add another one. So a number of years ago, we have a career pathways coordinator. We're still really under resourced for CTE, particularly given how much we've invested in it to actually move it forward as our workforce engine for the state. So part of the problem is that, it's not a problem, but actually 75% of our current team of 4 is federally funded. And so that restricts what they can do. They only have a certain de minimis amount of time they can spend on things that are not related to Perkins. And so we have one, the career pathways coordinator, and we're asking for another state funded.
I don't think anybody is, I've heard suggested that the agency itself is overstaffed, to be honest.
Well, this is what we're asking for this year. So thank you. And there's also a contract for civil rights data collection that we are obligated to do annually, and it has popped around. We've scrambled to find funding for it. We've gotten in trouble actually because we have not done those reviews on time. It's actually also part of CTE, which is fascinating to me because it comes out of the Office of Civil Rights, but the only requirement is to actually go and make sure our CTE centers are not harming student civil rights. When we do a contract or use our own staff, like they go out with like measuring tapes and actually have to measure to make sure that doorways and things are where they're supposed to be in terms of width. but we don't have that same requirement, for other entities. I think part of it is probably that as part of the other federal funding that's titled, the LEAs are already assuring this kind of stuff, but for us, it's kind of weird. It's kind of like this one-off thing that we have to do, we're mandated to do, they don't give us resources to do it. So we've come to say,
And you've come
we
back
finally-
for it then.
yes, we tried both. We tried to actually absorb it ourselves, which was not doable. That's when we got in because we were late. Or we scrambled to find money, so we would do a contract. So we're hoping to go into our budget this year is really what we're saying. You may recall the local food grant from last year. I believe it's $500,000. Correct, Sean? We're just putting that in the right place now, within the budget. Next, Sean. These are just the total categories. Would you like us to go through those or just give you a minute to look?
Well. No, you got some big numbers there, but particularly on that change, 141 million. That's huge.
Yes, a lot of money.
How you liking your new job, Nicole?
Put me right on the spot.
Well, we're glad you're there.
It's an adventure every day.
Uh-huh. Well, you gotta admit, it's intellectually stimulating,
Mhm.
because, the numbers are certainly there, but, so the big, line is obviously grants and, but
Sean,
as an agency, your budget is pretty straightforward and not a lot there. It's the grants out.
Yeah, and that changes the net between the increase in the ed fund grants and the decrease in the federal, from COVID money. So, our agency is supported by two main appropriations, and the other 12 or so are just in there with grant money. So we've got our finance and administration appropriation, our ed services, that we've talked about. 43% of the staff are in the finance and admin side, with 57% of the staff on the
You have a
education.
large vacancy rate.
we have it.
I mean, other agencies are having huge vacancy rate, that's just one thing.
We've halved the percent, and do you know, is it like 12% now?
So for the record, Bill Bates, agency of the CFO, and want to give a shout out to Secretary Boucher. Last year, on occasion, we had 25 vacancies. This year,
Out of 100,
Out of 176.
yes,
we're down to 14.
pretty easy, that's 14%.
So almost,
Yep, almost half.
almost half,
Even I could
with a
figure
little
that.
too rosy.
Did you go to public school?
Yeah, I did. Parking.
Hey,
Oh, no, you didn't.
I went to private schools, parking. It's the private schools that taught me to figure that out. Well, it's easy if you have 100 employees, right? We're down to 14%.
Yeah. Oh,
we
goodness.
have 176, 176.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're lucky your parents liked you. Okay.
Oh,
And I don't know I don't know the state average, I think we could probably get.
well,
I
I-
don't-
like state police are like 30% vacancies, and they're very high. And so that, and other DCF or other agencies are really in a bind in recruiting staff, so.
For us, it's been really helpful to be able to work remotely. We don't try to hire from out of state because that creates a lot of challenges and problems for a variety of reasons. And many of which for me are housing, if we, well, right, so, but housing is a problem, and so if we can, it's great, but then also if we there might be in, the next 5 years, a call to pull everyone back. And so then if we had, a quarter of our staff working across the country would be in a big
Yeah.
pile of trouble. So
You know-
I try to balance that, but I do think the ability even in state to work from home has created a lot of flexibility that has really improved morale. for our folks, and then also I think it's really helped recruit good folks.
The adult education and literacy grants, those are the ABA programs, the local
Yeah.
tutorial programs. They're unchanged at 3.5 million.
Yes.
So they've been complaining about being underfunded.
Well, they've been looking at changing the assessment, which seemed to have had some impact on, the funding.
Yes,
And
and
their recommendations to alter that, that was,
We gave money in the, yeah,
we gave 1.5, but they felt that with advance notice, they could
Thank you.
bring their
Okay.
programs
Thank you.
into a level of available funding, but they also felt that they would be also get help by the change in the assessment, which would make more students eligible. So our general
Shifting from high school to
between the two, but you're right, if we did put money.
the thing I would also note, we certainly want to support adult education. It's a really important component of our education system. But just like with our non-adult population, their numbers have been shrinking. And so I think we are often faced with a situation where we're like, what are we continuing to pay for? Is it largely overhead as the number of students decline? And so it's the same kind of questions that we're asking about our brick and mortar schools, right? Like, are you consolidating? Are you, or what's that gonna look like? So we try our very best to meet their need, but also, can't not point that out as well, that the number of students is declining, and that's actually by design, because that's what
We have a
Act
report
77
that
is about.
Place of that.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole idea about 77 is you build this flexibility into the regular high school experience, and you're not gonna need as many services for adult learners.
Along those same lines, each year the governor puts the Department of Corrections education program in the under general fund dollars, but he's never put it into the agency of education,
Community high school.
the community high school. So and every year the House takes it out, takes it out of the ed fund and puts it into the general fund. The governor puts it in the ed fund. The House puts it in the general fund. And then we're stuck agreeing with the governor, but if we agree with the governor, we're gonna fight the House, blah, blah, blah. So we actually, I think the majority of this committee probably agrees with the governor that it should be a education fund expense, but it never has been because,
No, it was.
well, it was in the early days.
Yeah.
Before the purists. So I'm just wondering why we don't put it.
Senator Sniggers, you're real challenging this afternoon.
Well, I've been on vacation.
said
I thought I was being
Yeah,
kind.
you were very kind, but I don't think the secretary is gonna give the answer that you might be hoping.
Well, I'm thinking we put this into the education.
Oh, here comes
Budget.
Senator Campion.
Agency of Education budget as part of the grant for the Agency of Education. I just said I'm fine, whatever they're doing.
Okay.
You have a chance to move on.
Sometimes I feel like I'm classroom.
Do you know that Senator Campion has somebody monitoring the entire time for Senator Sears to say something?
I realize,
Senator Kitchell, I apologize for interrupting. You're one of my favorite people in the building.
But you're going on
You
to the
must-
last
I'm sorry,
subject.
where are you meeting?
All right, that's what I'm gonna pass along, all right?
You can meet in the judiciary.
That we're gonna use it, thanks.
We did not change our pattern this year. So I can't really comment because we did not change any thinking about where it is compared to where it's usually been.
I do have a question though about,
We just wanted to make sure it gets paid.
ABE, and that is, I went to the program in St. Johnsbury, and there was a young student, and she was not faring in high school. So she actually was pretty much getting her high school education. Now, and it was wonderful to have that alternative. At least she was pursuing her education, but it was in an environment that worked for her,
Mhm.
as opposed to those, whatever high school she would have gone to. So how, would that student carry the money and would ABE get the, does that, getting back to Senator Sears' concern? Cause that obviously is an alternative for some kids, or even to take a class, cause they've got a relationship problem with a teacher maybe. That create the same kind of problems that we have with CTE, where, the homeschool doesn't necessarily want them or wants to keep the money, or,
No.
how do you pay for that student?
Right, so textualize that, the thing I didn't note is that the reason you're seeing the same pattern for the ABE, the adult education students, is because the large majority of them are late teens, early 20s. So it's not the way we used to think of back in the day, if you will, adult basic education, where it's a majority of older folks.
High school dropouts.
Right, high school dropouts, quite a while ago, and they're learning how to read. We still do have those students, but that's certainly not the majority of students that are in our adult basic education programs. So, if they disenroll, which is an option, they can disenroll currently, and then there is no ADM, they would just, their education would just be picked up by the grant funding that both there's federal grants as well, and state grants that the Adult Education Center has. But we currently do have a separate thing called the High School Completion Program. And it's been a little bit problematic through the years because, like other parts of the Ed Fund, I think it is seen as kind of an endless font of money. And so there are students that choose that option because it allows them to still get their diploma from the high school. So if you don't do that avenue, then you're gonna get likely a GED, which works for some students. So that's another way that the funding occurs for that student. So it's still not ADM, but like there's the Agency of Education pays that adult education center on behalf of the district.
Okay, so
Does that clarify?
it does. I mean, I think we generally find that a high school diploma carries, when you're applying for a job, carries perhaps more gravitas than a GED. Although a GED means you did have to pass a test, so you've got some competency demonstration there that sometimes maybe a
They
diploma
have to
is,
pass assessments for high school completion program too.
so it's better start.
Yeah, under the adult education and literacy program, you got basically 3.5 million. How's that divided up
Oh,
between
we have to look.
adult and literacy?
Oh, it's all the same. So they don't get separate grants for literacy and separate for adult ed. That's just the name of the program. So they get lump grants for what we call AEL, and they get similar federal grants. So we have 4 different adult education providers in the state.
See, if you read, I spent a lot of years on the school board and before the union. And if you read a lot even today about literacy, our primary grades, for some reason, they're not teaching literacy. And if they test them like in the 3rd grade, 4th grade, I mean, we're the pits. I mean, very, very low. And,
Meaning the state or your area?
no state.
Or middle?
And, well, they're crowding it quite better.
Depends
By
on-
saying middle of,
It's not great.
no.
Less than half of our kids
Pretty
score as
embarrassed.
being able to read, but it is the national average. So
And, yeah, we're spending 20 grand a kid. Whether it's primary.
that's
And,
veterans.
yeah, it's more than, and it just seems strange to me, like I was trying to do this year a little program, where, the DPL, Dolly Parton Literacy Program. And I know if you look at states that have done that, those test scores are up anywhere from 6 to 12% of children that went through that program. For 6 to 12% above the average student. And yet, when that issue came up in education, the agency couldn't support that. And it just seems, I mean, I'm very interested in our children. And if you don't teach them how to read, by the time they get to the 7th and 8th grade, they're really troubled. And they never finish high school, most of them. And I don't understand why an agency of education would oppose a program that could possibly, maybe, I mean, with a big question mark, help these children with their literacy because they're gonna get started at home and so I don't know where you folks were coming from on that, but I wasn't very impressed with what you guys have been promoting or where you stood on this particular bill and,
Is there a bill?
Yes.
yeah, and you're gonna need
Oh, the
five,
literacy bill. Oh,
Yeah.
gonna need 5 employees and gonna need this and need that. I mean, hell, we were gonna be another $1 million into setting up a little reading program and I mean, it never has happened in other states where it costs that kind of money, but.
So what, well, yeah,
I'm gonna have you give a brief response, because obviously we're getting into, I thought it was 100,000, but it's,
Yeah.
which the
Yeah.
governor's not proposed.
I think when we did our calculation, there are more hidden costs, like, and they would be looking for a appropriation that would continue, and we'd also need more staff to lift the program, so it isn't that, it's real, so I know you might believe that, Senator Starr, but there would be some significant staffing needed, and it would actually take away from what we believe is an evidence-based, not that Dolly's is not evidence-based, it is. But when we're talking about the scale of what we need to do the work on, we really think that what we've proposed, which is to really make sure that all of our teachers have basic understanding of how kids actually read, make sure they get that training, make sure they get the professional development. Universal screening for dyslexia, and really trying to get our teacher preparation programs on board to make sure that when they're actually training teachers, they're coming out knowing how to actually teach kids how to read. Are a better bet at this point.
Well, I'd say you're quite a few years behind the ball because, I mean, our kids are being tested today. And you know the scores, and it's almost embarrassing for the amount of money that we're spending per child of taxpayers' money. Because every dime of it comes from the people. And getting results where less than half can read efficiently is not anything I'd want to go home and talk to mom about, I'll tell you. And so I don't know what you're doing, but I know it needs improvement.
I completely agree with you. And the package that we have put forth that has made it out of Senate Education is actually what other states have done and have shown, for instance, Mississippi have shown incredible improvement in terms of their literacy.
So, but I realize we're getting into another bill, and I'm looking at the clock, and we're well past the scheduled time. I don't want to rush you in any way, and I know this is an issue. Literacy has been a concern of Senator Starr's, and and that gets into the whole issue around cost, outcomes, how you measure what, strategies, etc. I'm beginning to think we should just bring a puppy dog to every class and let kids read to their dogs. That seems to be a very therapeutic and apparently a very So everybody's got ideas
We
about,
need to make sure they understand phonics first.
you know, but we didn't
No.
teach phonics, we taught whole word.
Correct.
We were, you know, grown up, sound it out, sound it out. How many times were you told, sound it out?
That's fine.
I know.
We moved away
Right,
from
yeah.
that as a nation.
Did you diagram sentences, you know, you have your verb, you bend down, you're modifying, how?
Did you have the letter people?
Sorry.
Did you have the letter people?
Yeah.
Anyone heard of the letter people?
Oh, the Zena blows her.
They were blow up letter people? Okay, we're so off. Sorry. They were,
I don't know.
they were fantastic little characters. I was asking you, Mr. Pro Tem, because of growing up in New York.
Oh,
I had some teachers that never
We
finished.
have fewer kids and more
You
spending,
know,
right?
they got degrees.
yes, 20%
We have
decline in enrollment.
And we lost
9%
them.
decline in enrollment, and we're spending 20,000 per kid.
Education spending. is more
Any
than
other
that.
states spend that much?
No, we're number 2 now.
After New Jersey.
New Jersey,
Yeah.
so we're number one,
We used to
and
be
our
number 1.
results are not number one.
Correct, they're about
Two.
average.
We're number 2 and our results are average. So something's wrong.
But the average is pretty low.
So I'm gonna move
No, I'm
on.
going by the spending.
I'm going to, as committee chair, I'm gonna move on so that we can get to Senator Perchlik's question.
My question is the block grant education, the special education block grant, a success story of an effort that we did that is reducing costs?
I don't think we can tell yet. And I really mean that seriously, because I don't think it's fair because of COVID for us to actually, I don't think we have the data we need. So for instance, special education costs have gone up. But I don't think that it's fair to say that's due to Act 173 failing. I think it's that we have incredible.
So what are you trying to
and in
show
particular,
on that one slide?
that's
Slide
your,
of
it's your
diversity.
slide. I think it's
36.
the fact that it's the acuity of student need has gone up. I think that's what it is.
And
Is that what you're saying is like that before we had block grant spending was, close to 205 million, but then since that, the block grants have the funds.
So in this one, we are showing just the flat nature of the block grant as compared to the 2 things that it replaced. So if we were at 203 million, we've reduced that and it's traveling at a pretty flat trajectory to 2027, where everyone will be in the universal base amount.
So that means it's working as we.
Well, that's what I
But-
thought, so you were trying to say.
But our total special education spending is up. And that's what I was concluding that. Do you want to?
So the block grant, one piece, extraordinary,
Because you have to add the extraordinary costs.
right?
And those have been going up, to make up the difference of the savings in the fund.
And more.
And
But I think to Secretary Boucher's point, one of the things that I've sort of added into the graphic related to extraordinary is it's not, yes, it is a significant jump when you look at 22 million in reimbursements in 2022 and projected 65 million in reimbursements in 25. However, we have a significant jump in students, and if we think that our threshold is over $66,000, each student that you add to that system
they're very,
is quite a bit of money. But again, that goes to acuity, not Act 173's success or not.
because we didn't predict that when we passed that the acuity would go up so much and that those extraordinary costs would be so high.
Right, that's what I meant. And
We want
a lot of them are out of state
Yeah.
placements now because we've lost
This guy.
settings where they used to be able to be in the
Yeah, I noticed that out-of-state placements weren't included in your initial slide.
I think
It's
that
$19 million.
the out of state is in there, isn't it?
It is,
Yeah.
it is in there,
And
it
they-
wasn't in your summary where you had literacy.
They're incredibly.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, yes.
Yeah.
I think in my mind, it was under the acute.
Remember Tony Campbell?
Stuff, but it's important to pull it out.
We used to be in charge of reviewing every case of any student going out of state.
Extraordinary.
But to go to an out-of-state program it's done very reluctantly, simply because of,
Absolutely.
from, away from family and the cost and, you know, whatever.
It worries me that DCM,
36.
education, DNH, all these are using out of state listeners. And they're extremely
Yeah, they
expensive.
are. So I'm gonna keep going. In terms of the budget, other questions, obviously, we're getting into the much larger discussion around, funding and cost of our current structure. The agency budget is pretty modest and straightforward. So I'm gonna just, because we're approaching 4:30, any other questions, at this point, relative to the budget?
If there was anything we missed in terms of, I mean, it was kind of more straightforward on our side, our operations, some of those points that I already laid out to you. Sure.
The highlight was the general fund budget increase in 721,000 or 4.19%.
Yeah. Thank you for coming in.
Yeah.
Obviously.
You're very welcome.
We are meeting this afternoon.
That's correct.
No, I mean. We're not.
Oh, I was like, maybe cancel on my calendar, but I can be there, I suppose, if it's been
No, I'm
rescheduled.
not going to be there either. It's been
Nicole is an
rescheduled.
honorary member of the General Assembly at this point.
She's supposed to be at the agency in 30 seconds.
You know something, some of this actually is probably, just as well that you're not biased, you're coming in with a total kind of, fresh examination, and there's nothing like